Hi, I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of Game of Thrones Season 7, Episode 3, The Queen's Justice. An episode that showed us if Cersei Lannister is ever wearing lipstick, something is very, very wrong. Now, there is a lot to break down, stuff you missed, subtle connections to the books and past episodes, but also this time we're going to include some bonus sections that take harder, in-depth looks at how this episode uses things like shot imagery, themes, costuming, and the history that inspired all of these characters. And sure, a batshit theory or two. Let's get started. Okay, so this episode opens with waves crashing on the rocks of Dragonstone. Now, this is similar to last episode, which showed us the same stormy waves at nighttime. But now that the storm has subsided, these waves are washing up some bad news for Daenerys. One, the news of Euron defeating her fleet, and two, the news brought by Jon Snow, that the army of the dead will make all of her lifelong ambitions pretty pointless. Now, once we get on the beach, we get this long-time reunion between Jon and Tyrion, and notice how Jon recognizes Tyrion's scar.
Picked up some scars along the road.
It's been a long road.
Now, like many of you, I was surprised at how civil and reasonable all these guys were. And I think it's because all three of them have these kind of battle scars from the wars that led them to this point. Tyrion and Davos have scars from the Battle of Blackwater, which they bring up, and Jon has scars from the Battle of the Bastards that led him to becoming Lord of Winterfell. And yeah, obviously Jon has a few other scars that were given to him by the Night's Watch when he died, but he doesn't really want to bring those up, and I'll get to why later. Anyway, I think the idea is that all of these scars are giving these war veterans a mutual respect for each other, something that they didn't have before. And moving on to two characters who have no respect for each other, Varys and Melissandre. So I think a lot of people were wondering why Varys is so hostile in this scene. It helps to look at these two as rival advisors to the crown with different sources of power. Varys has secrecy and rumors and informants, and Melissandre has mysticism and divine power. It's kind of like the head of the CIA versus Miss Cleo. That's why she's not around anymore, just saying. But really, Varys actually already told us exactly why he hates Melissandre, way back in Season 3. Remember, he told Tyrion the story of how he became a eunuch. As a boy, he was castrated by a sorcerer who chanted incantations.
He burned my parts in a brazier. The flames turned blue, and I heard a voice answer his call. I dream of the voice from the flames. Was it a god, a demon, a conjurer's trick? I don't know. But the sorcerer called, and a voice answered. And ever since that day, I have hated magic and all those who practice it.
And that scene is why it's so interesting when Melissandre wins the conversation with this line.
My lady.
I have to die in this strange country. Just like you.
So I think it's possible that the voice Varys heard in those flames, the voice that haunts him after all these years, was the same power that the Hound actually just saw in the flames. The Lord of Light telling Varys how he will die. But while we're talking about this, I think Melisandre's line is also reminiscent of another moment in Season 3, the moment she met Arya.
I see a darkness in you. We will meet again.
Okay, moving on to the Dragonstone throne room with Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen together at last. And even though the dialogue between these two is very interesting, I would say their costumes alone tell the full story between these two monarchs. So let's go into this and go into our Game of Thrones fashion roundup. Okay, so first off, we got Daenerys. Notice how she's wearing this chain. Now, the costume designer Michelle Clapton said this chain is meant as a lesser version of a crown, and she's never been fully coronated on the show. So Clapton gave her this chain to reflect her eagerness to get that crown, to acquire the Iron Throne. And she tries to do that by impressing her power over Jon. Now, let's look at Jon's costume. For the first time this season, we're seeing him without his cape and furs. And that's because the designer wanted Jon to look smaller and more vulnerable in this scene. Actually, later this episode, Jon puts his cape and furs back on, and while he looks less vulnerable, he does transform into a version of Ned Stark. Tyrion actually calls him a northern fool, just like how Ned Stark felt when he was in King's Landing. So really, when you look at their costumes together, compared to Daenerys, who looms large in the frame, Jon looks like a small man just standing in a small room. And on one side, we have an eager, almost queen, frustrated with the other side, the smaller, strange northerner who defies her. Okay, coming out of our costume section, you may remember in the previous scene that Melissandre said this line.
I've brought ice and fire together.
Now, of course, that's a nod to the title of the book series, but I also like how both ice and fire apply to Jon and Daenerys' demeanor in this scene. Daenerys is fiery in the way she's trying to engage Jon in debate and accuse him of disrespect and wasting her time, while Jon is cold as ice, willing to sacrifice the love between him and Dany. I made it work. Really, he is cold shouldering this whole discussion if he's not going to get any help to fight the White Walkers. But then notice how things soften between them when Daenerys apologizes for the actions of her father, the Mad King.
And I ask you not to judge a daughter by the sins of her father.
And of course, the reason this melts Jon's icy heart, if only for a second, is this is the same exact words Jon just used to pardon the children of his former enemies in the season premiere.
But I will not punish a son for his father's sins.
Okay, so big question here. Why doesn't Jon want Davos to bring up his resurrection by Melisandre? Well, there's a few ways to look at it, but notice how he initially described the White Walkers.
The army of the dead is on the march.
So for one, Jon realizes that he already sounds crazy enough trying to convince Daenerys that White Walkers even exist. And then on top of that, if he says, hey, I was also brought back to life, he sounds legit crazy. But another way of looking at this is Daenerys already sees Jon as an enemy to the north. So if he reveals himself as a supernatural being brought back from the dead, he's probably concerned that Daenerys won't discriminate between this dead person in front of her and the army of the dead that he's trying to prepare to fight. Okay, moving on past Theon being picked up by his fellow Greyjoys to King's Landing, where Euron returns with a hero's welcome. And noticed how he rides this horse, which by the way has this awesome Euron Kraken mask, and he rides this horse right into the Red Keep. This move actually mirrors another time a hero of King's Landing rode a horse into the Red Keep. Remember Tywin Lannister, after he rescued the city in the Battle of Blackwater. So I think Euron is intentionally trying to evoke Cersei's father here. This is another one of his weird aggressive flirts. He's trying to be the bad boy who's also just like dad, which is what every woman wants. Right? That's what I read in those books that haven't done anything for me. And notice what Euron says here.
I give you what no other man could give. Justice.
So, of course, the Queen's Justice is the title of this episode, and I'll explain later what exactly it means and how it connects to the themes of this episode. I think it's also interesting that Cersei set up this rivalry between Jaime, who leads the Crown's army, and Euron, who leads the Crown's navy. This is kind of like how in real life there has been famously a rivalry between the branches of the armed forces. All right, moving on to the crypts, and right away you probably noticed that Cersei is totally wearing lipstick here, which isn't usual for her, but of course by the end of the scene, it's clear why. But notice how, for just a moment, Cersei actually lets her guard down when talking about what Ellaria did to her daughter, Myrcella.
And you took her from me. Why did you do that?
So this is real vulnerable emotion from Cersei. And the reason she has this moment is we need to have just enough sympathy for her so that when we see her cruelly punish them, it seems at least a little justified. Actually, I want to give a shout out to @VLBerg for bringing this to our attention. The word Cersei uses to describe what will happen to Tyene might sound familiar.
You will live to watch your daughter rot. To watch that beautiful face collapse to bone and dust.
This is a callback to last season when Cersei was grieving Myrcella's death, and she used this same imagery to describe how she feared her daughter was rotting in the crypt.
Think about her beautiful little face starting to collapse.
And in case any of you were wondering if Ellaria might be able to make a big escape, actress Indira Varma did say that this was her last episode. And as the Light of the Seven violin music plays, Cersei continues this power streak by moving on to Jaime. And notice how he's initially resistant, but Cersei pressures him into it anyway. And I think this is Cersei turning the tables on Jaime from that super messed up moment in season 4, when the memory of another dead child of theirs led to a similar situation. Now, who is this short-haired maid of Cersei's? This is actually Bernadette. She's been the same Red Keep maid since really the beginning of the series. You may remember as the maid who discovered Sansa's first period in season 2. She's the one that Shae threatened when she tried to go run tell Cersei. We also saw her bring Tyrion to Sansa in season 3, and then in season 4 she ratted out Shae, interrupting Cersei and Jaime fighting, and then last season she's the one who told Cersei about Jaime's return from Dorne, and she's the one who helped Cersei get ready for the Green trial. So why now does she have this short haircut? I actually think this is evidence of Cersei starting a new fashion trend. All of her maids are now trying to embody her look. Kind of like in the 60s when Jackie Kennedy was First Lady, everyone wanted to have her haircut. Okay, moving on to this scene with Cersei and Tycho Nestoris, aka Mycroft Holmes from Sherlock. He's representative of the Iron Bank. Now notice how Tycho refuses this glass of wine that Cersei offers. Now he reveals moments later that he knows that it was Cersei who blew up the Sept and it wasn't an accident as she claims. So yeah, it makes sense that he's not going to trust any food that this queen hands him. Now, the Iron Bank actually has roots in real-world history, so let's dive deep into the historical influences for this episode. So we know George R.R. Martin based Game of Thrones on the War of the Roses of England, when the houses of York and Lancaster, which might sound a lot like Stark and Lannister, these two houses battled over the throne for decades. But while that war raged on, in Italy there was the Medici family. They were one of the richest and most powerful families of Europe, and they established a bank that they used to fund different sides of this war, based off of whoever seemed like they were most likely to win. So the Iron Bank is based on this Medici bank. Notice how Tycho approves that Cersei destroyed the religious forces of King's Landing, calling them superstition.
The Iron Bank appreciates how you cast off the yoke of superstition.
There was actually a rivalry between the Medici Bank and the Catholic Church. They were the two most powerful forces in Renaissance Italy, and they both were constantly jockeying for more influence. But eventually, bidding on the wrong sides of the War of the Roses doomed the Medici Bank. And I predict the same thing will happen to the Game of Thrones Iron Bank. Okay, coming out of this history bit, notice how Cersei promises to repay the Iron Bank's debt within a fortnight. Now remember, back in the season premiere, Jaime told her that the Tyrells of Highgarden were now the richest family of Westeros. And now, right after she has given in to Jaime, I think this all means that she signaled her next move. Okay, moving on, Tyrion ends up being the MVP of this episode. He uses his negotiation skills to bring Jon and Daenerys together, and notice this moment when Daenerys calls him out for quoting himself.
Are you trying to present your own statements as ancient wisdom?
I would never do that. To you.
So this is a callback to the scene from last season when Tyrion tried to make conversation with Missandei and Grey Worm in Meereen.
A wise man once said, the true history of the world is a history of great conversations in elegant rooms.
Who said this?
Me. Just now.
And then later, when the matchmaking is complete and Jon and Daenerys come to terms, I was interested in Daenerys' line when she brings up her brothers Viserys and Rhaegar.
You lost 2 brothers as well.
So Jon used to think that he lost 3 brothers, right? Robb, Rickon, and Bran. But then last season, when Rickon returned to him, well, almost. Actually, that letter from Ramsay confirmed that the 2 boys weren't burned by Theon, that Rickon was still alive, and so Bran must still be out there too. What really interested me about this scene, and something that's been happening throughout this episode if you've been paying attention, is the specific moments that parallel Jon with his real-life birth father, Daenerys' brother, Rhaegar Targaryen. So let's dive into this. Okay, so first, earlier in this episode, there was this little moment back at Dragonstone.
But I'm not a Stark.
So at the precise moment that Jon distanced himself from his Stark lineage, a dragon, the symbol of the Targaryen family, drops in. The next moment came in the scene that came after, where Davos says this.
All those hard sons of bitches chose him as their leader because they believe in him.
This is actually a callback to something Barristan Selmy told Daenerys about Rhaegar in season 3.
When your brother Rhaegar led his army into battle of the Trident, men died for him because they believed in him. Because they loved him.
And then, finally, in this scene, there's an exchange between Daenerys and Jon.
We all enjoy what we're good at.
No, I don't.
I think Jon is hinting that he's good at killing, he just doesn't enjoy it. And back in season 5, there was another conversation between Selmy and Daenerys, again about Rhaegar.
Rhaegar never liked killing.
So just to put this all together, this episode paints Jon as having this connection with dragons, a man who inspires all of his men, and a great killer who doesn't like killing. Jon truly is his father's son. Okay, moving on to Winterfell, and we get this very interesting quote from Littlefinger that Sansa actually stops to listen to for once.
Don't fight in the north or the south. Fight every battle, everywhere, always. In your mind, everyone is your enemy, everyone is your friend. Every possible series of events is happening all at once.
So Littlefinger is advising Sansa to consider every eventuality, the way one might in a game of chess. But this is also how the military played war games during the Cold War, with experts simultaneously thinking through every possible outcome so that nothing could surprise them. Actually, if you were looking closely, we just saw Littlefinger considering one eventuality in the previous scene. So watch Littlefinger when Wilken talks about the archives at Winterfell.
I'll check Maester Lewin's records. He kept a copy of every Raven scroll.
Boom. Littlefinger is sharply in focus in this shot, and we're definitely meant to notice him registering this information. So I think this is Littlefinger realizing that Lewin kept records of every correspondence in and out of Winterfell, meaning every letter that Ned and Catelyn received. So what does this mean? Maybe Littlefinger is afraid that there's a paper trail that could be used against him in some way, or maybe he's seeing this as a possible treasure trove of Winterfell secrets that he can delve into and use somehow. Anyway, let me know what you think this look means in the comments. But of course, this whole idea of having an omniscient bird's eye view of Westeros is a direct setup for the next person we see who has this same exact view of the world, Bran. Yeah, baby, Bran is back. But I think this awkward reunion between Bran and Sansa actually parallels the awkward coming together of Jon and Daenerys. In both cases, they're two leaders on the same side, but ultimately talking past each other, with Sansa and Daenerys as the ambitious leaders who want more influence, while Bran and Jon are these frustrating, superpowered freaks from way up north who don't even want power. And a little detail that I liked here, notice how when Bran mentions that he's the three-eyed raven and looks over at the weirwood tree, in the distance we can hear a raven caw.
I need to be ready.
All right, moving on to Old Town, and after Sam brings yet another character back from certain death on the show, Ebrose doles out his punishment, making copies. So now that Jorah is healed and Jon knows about the dragon glass, what do we think Sam's next step is? What is his character's destiny? I actually have an interesting theory based on what's going on in the scene, so let's activate my favorite segment in these Game of Thrones breakdowns, Theory Time. Okay, so Ebrose makes it clear that these manuscripts and scrolls are old. They're falling apart, filled with paper mites, which I didn't even know existed, but I super fear now. So first question, what do we think Sam's gonna find in these books? He's gotta find something. He always does. Really, let's ask ourselves, what is the biggest mystery left in Game of Thrones? That's right, the White Walkers. There is still so much we don't know about them. Where they're going, what they want. Have they turned Hodor into one of them? Hopefully not. I actually have a side theory that the White Walkers just want to get revenge for being created by the Children of the Forest, and they're headed to the Weirwood Grove on the Isle of Faces in the God's Eye. And actually can hear more about this theory by watching my biggest Game of Thrones mystery video. Whatever those secrets about the White Walkers are, based on these books being super old, that no one has read them in decades, I'm thinking Sam's gonna discover some lost knowledge about the White Walkers in these scrolls. But I also don't think it's gonna be that easy. This is George R.R. Martin. I don't think he's gonna let Sam defeat the White Walkers by just opening a book and following instructions like he did to treat Jorah's grayscale. So here's where I'm going with this. I think the Citadel Library is based on a famous library from history, the Library of Alexandria in ancient Egypt. And guys, that library burned. It was believed that all kinds of knowledge about the ancient world was lost forever. So I predict that this Citadel Library will burn too. maybe dragonfire, maybe someone accidentally kicks over a wildfire jar, or maybe one of those astrolabe lenses gets too hot and lights an Archmaester's robes on fire. I think it's going to be Sam's destiny to carry the torch of all of this knowledge, history, remedies for grayscale, dragonglass, the White Walkers, and it's going to be on him to gradually piece together all of this knowledge, all from his own memory. Okay, let's move on to Tyrion explaining his battle plan in Dragonstone. Now, the specifics of what exactly is going on in this sequence confused a lot of you guys, actually. Did the first part of Tyrion's plan with the Unsullied trying to climb the ladders really happen? Or was it just a hypothetical scenario that Tyrion was proposing not to do? I assume you already have your answer here, but just know that we did put up a poll and viewers are surprisingly split on this. Kind of like the dress all over again. Was Tyrion explaining two separate black and blue alternate plans, or one complex white and gold plan? Now, a big part of the reason for this confusion is because Tyrion is explaining the plan as we see it happen. This is a cool technique that filmmakers use to condense a narrative. You may remember it used in Ocean's 11, but the editing of the sequence seems to present two alternate strategies. Like, it begins with Tyrion's voiceover on how outmatched the Unsullied are against Casterly Rock's defenses as we see Grey Worm leading the siege. Then we cut immediately to the Unsullied getting taken down by Lannister archers, and for a second it almost seems like that might be Grey Worm dead on the ground there. But then no. Tyrion then explains his alternate plan, with Grey Worm leading a small group in the secret entrance, taking out the Lannisters and opening the gates. So does that mean that the first sequence that we saw was just an imaginary disaster scenario that never really happened? Like in Superbad? Maybe, but if you look super closely at this, when Grey Worm sneaks into the guard tower, you can see Lannister troops rushing by in the background as if they're currently engaged in the siege at the castle walls that we saw before. And when the Unsullied rush in, you can see those archers' arrows in their shields. And then finally, when we see the Unsullied fleet at the end of the sequence, it's in the same place as it was in the first part of the sequence. So judging from all this evidence, these are both parts of the same real strategy, with Unsullied dying out front to distract the Lannisters from Grey Worm's sneak attack from within. Now, I think it's worth noting that this open-endedness is kind of a director trademark for Mark Mylod. Remember, last season he directed episodes 7 and 8 with Arya barely escaping the waif of the Faceless Men, and there were some key inconsistencies there that led to some obsessives online, us, forming all of these clues into interesting theories. Was that really Arya? Was there a fake Arya? Is everyone Arya? Really, I think that Mylod shows both parts of Tyrion's plan to reflect Littlefinger's words from earlier. Tyrion is trying to think through every possible eventuality. Unfortunately, he missed a big one. I actually predicted this might be Tyrion's plan, considering this was all foreshadowed way back in season 2.
When I reached manhood, my father put me in charge of all the drains and cisterns in Casterly Rock. The water never flowed better, and all the shit found its way to the sea.
And Tyrion's explanation of why he created the secret passage to smuggle in women is itself another callback to season 2. Remember, Tyrion used a similar secret path to sneak out of the Red Keep to reach Shay in King's Landing. And by the way, I like how Grey Worm's infiltration of Casterly Rock includes a stop by Tyrion's old, undisturbed fuckbed. And then notice this line from Tyrion.
Casterly Rock is an impregnable fortress, but as a good friend of mine once said, give me 10 good men and I'll impregnate the bitch.
So I guess Tyrion has gone back to quoting people other than himself. And of course, this good friend was Bronn. He actually said this same line about the Eyrie way back in season 1.
Give me 10 good men and some climbing spikes. I'll impregnate the bitch.
Now, there's some interesting shot composition going on here, so let's take a moment to discuss the creative imagery used throughout this episode. So here, right as Tyrion describes the Unsullied impregnating the Casterly Rock walls, we get this provocative overhead shot of the Unsullied rushing in, and yeah, the angle of those walls, the central opening, it can't just be me, right? Like, Casterly Rock is getting pregnant, ironically by men who are incapable of getting anyone pregnant. Now, another instance of creative imagery that I really liked came in an earlier scene when Jon and Tyrion are making their way up this narrow walkway to Dragonstone. Notice how the director uses this long, complicated tracking shot, winding up the path as it twists and turns. So why does he do this? In this moment, Tyrion and Jon are literally discussing the long, winding road that each of them took to get to this point. And director Mark Mylod is dramatizing dramatizing that by having the two of them literally walk a long, winding road, and for the viewer to walk that with them. Okay, coming out of that imagery analysis, I do want to point out that this shot of Grey Worm looking out in fear at Euron's fleet as it sinks what's left of Daenerys' fleet and traps them in. I think this shot is meant to parallel another miscalculation by Tyrion last season when the Slavers' fleet used similar firebombs to siege Meereen. And it's going to be interesting to see how Daenerys responds now that Tyrion has effed up twice. Now, if you're curious why Daenerys' forces are now 0-2, Philip and Maude actually have a very interesting theory on how this is happening. Okay, moving on from Casterly Rock to another new location that we haven't really seen before, Highgarden. So even though Jaime mentions it, I just want to clarify what exactly happened here. So Jaime used the same diversion tactic against the Unsullied army that Robb Stark used against him in the Whispering Wood. This was in the War of the Five Kings, which we saw in season 2. Robb allowed Tywin to think that they were going to meet one-on-one battle at the Green Fork, but Robb tricked him by just sending a small portion of his army. Meanwhile, he moved the main part of his army somewhere far more valuable to strike something far more vulnerable, Jaime's division. And of course, Jaime would remember this Whispering Wood battle because it's where he got captured. It was the event that changed his life forever. So now he let the Unsullied take Casterly Rock, which was expendable now that the gold mines are depleted, and he turned his sights on something far more valuable, Highgarden. Now you'll notice that Jaime has Randall and Dickon Tarly at his side. So this isn't just Lannister men, Jaime has all of the Tyrell's bannermen to turn against Olenna. And then after Jaime sacks the city, notice we get this quick shot of these golden bars. Now I'm guessing these are the ones that Cersei's probably hoping to use to deliver on her promise to the Iron Bank. Now fun fact, in the books, Highgarden has a rooftop garden maze. It's a literal high garden. And as we saw Jaime march his way to Olenna's quarters, I kind of hoped that he would make a wrong turn and end up in that big hedge maze. And then when Jaime finds Olenna, she says this line.
And now the rains weep o'er our halls.
So yeah, this is a lyric from the Lannister victory song, The Rains of Castamere. But you remember it tells a story of the last time the Lannisters made an entire house disappear, which is exactly what they're doing now by killing off the final Tyrell. Cersei actually explained this history to Olenna's granddaughter, Marjorie, in season 3, and now we're seeing her deliver on that threat.
Do you know where House Rain is now? Gone. Gone. A gentle word. Not say slaughtered.
But Cersei making good on her promises brings us back to this idea of the Queen's Justice. So as we come to a close here, let's discuss the title of the episode. What does the Queen's Justice mean? So this phrase is a reference to the King's Justice, something that we've definitely heard in Game of Thrones before. The King's Justice refers to the duty of the royal executioner. It's the guy who cuts off the heads in the name of the king. Of course, in the North, in Ned Stark's view, this should be done in the old way. He who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Either way, the King's Justice is swift and emotionless. But what does this episode say about the Queen's Justice? Well, let's look at what Cersei does. She punishes Ellaria Sand for killing her daughter with a poison kiss by doing the same to her daughter, and then she makes her watch as her daughter gradually rots. And now she punishes Olenna Tyrell by having Jaime make her drink poison wine. And in case you missed this, like the punishment for Ellaria and Tyene, even though Cersei and Jaime don't yet realize it, this is also parallel to the murder of another one of their children, Joffrey, whom of course Olenna poisoned. And in both of these cases, the Queen's Justice is the opposite of the King's Justice. The Queen's Justice is heartfelt and slow, drawn out. And honestly, it's creative. The Queen's Justice is poetic justice. It's reciprocal. And I think it's fitting that in both cases, Cersei used poison. In the books, poison is called a woman's weapon. So while the King's Justice uses a broadsword, the Queen's Justice uses poison. But later in the books, Oberyn Martell actually gave us a deeper insight into poison. He said, any man who calls a poison a woman's weapon is a traitor to his fellow men. Poison is cold, calculating. Poison is the thought that wakes you up in the morning and lulls you to sleep at night. You watch your victim die 1,000 times before you ever offer him that fateful taste. Is a man's hate so inferior to a woman's that we are to be denied such a weapon? So when you think of the Queen's Justice as a poison, it actually gives some new context to these closing images with Olenna and Jaime. So remember, Olenna is nicknamed the Queen of Thorns. And I think in this moment, the Queen's justice also applies to this queen as well. By revealing to Jaime that she was the one who poisoned their son Joffrey, the Queen of Thorns is metaphorically poisoning the Lannisters too. Because now Jaime has proof that Tyrion was innocent, but I'm sure Cersei will never see Tyrion as anything more than an enemy. And I predict that this conflict will grow strong as a toxic, corrosive disease between Jaime and Cersei. And just like how the opening images were a sign of doom, bad news coming in, these closing images show bad news going out, as the Queen of Thorns in her dying moments delivers one last dose of the Queen's justice. So what do you think Jaime's gonna do with Olenna's confession now? And what did you think about my theory involving Sam in the Library of the Citadel? Also, what do you make of Melisandre's line to Varys? Like, do you think it's connected to what Varys heard in the flames? And most importantly, do you think Jon and Dany are gonna do it? Let me know your thoughts. And if you have any further questions, definitely tweet them at us with the hashtag Westeros and Philip and Maud might answer them in the show. You can hit me up at Erik Voss or New Rockstars at New Rockstars. And share this video and subscribe to New Rockstars to see all of our Game of Thrones content. And if you haven't already, make sure to check out my breakdowns of episodes 1 and 2 and keep an eye out for my breakdown of next episode, The Spoils of War. And if you're feeling generous, you can contribute to us on Patreon and help us make more of these videos. Thanks for watching and see you next week. Bye.